It was a really good day. Yeah, really good day. Great to see the crowd. Amazing to see to be out on track in a Ferrari here at Silverstone. It's been pretty incredible. And also with the Red Bull and McLaren had an upgrade. So for us to be in the mix still, given that they've had a step today, it's really positive.
You look quick on the soft, you look quick on the medium. It just generally felt like you picked a rhythm up quite quickly, which may be unusual this year on a Friday.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm progressing a lot now with the car and much more comfortable in knowing where it needs to be. I think by P2 we still weren't where we needed to be. So in P2 definitely struggled a little bit more, but we know the changes that we need to make for the next session. So.
And it must be super.
Can a simple free practice change the course of a season? What if I told you that Hamilton's words in Silverstone were not just a celebration, but a warning? Silverstone is not simply the layout where the Great Britain Grand Prix is run. It is an emotional cathedral for Lewis Hamilton. From his first victories with McLaren to the epic traced with Mercedes, this circuit has witnessed the growth, dominance and consecration of the most successful British pilot of all time. But in 2025, everything was different. For the first time in his career, Lewis did not return as a prodigal son of Mercedes, but as a brand new incorporation of Ferrari. A transformation that not only altered the symbolic account of his return home, but also aroused intense questions about whether the seven-time champion could still leave a mark, this time dressed in red. The first races of the year had been marked by an ambiguous narrative around Hamilton. His adaptation to SF25 was not as immediate as many imagined. Although Ferrari came from a solid 2024 season, with a strategic comeback that placed him as the second-best team in the championship, the Hamilton jump from an increasingly erratic Mercedes towards a Ferrari with different driving philosophy was more complex than expected. The press began to slide doubts. Had he made a mistake when leaving the German ship? Was your time in Formula One already in mind count? Therefore, free practices in Silverstone were loaded with superior symbolism. The British environment covered him, yes, but he also watched him with a critical magnifying glass. The meteorological context contributed the perfect conditions for pure performance. Dry track, environment temperature of 22 degrees and asphalt to 38. An ideal scenario for monoplaces to show their true potential without climate distortions. During the 60 minutes of the FP1, the paddock witnessed a meticulously calculated performance of Hamilton. It was not an isolated miraculous lap or take advantage of a circumstantial window. It was a progressive rhythm construction, return to return, showing traction solidity, precision in medium curves and controlled aggressiveness in high-speed areas. Each track reference from the moment he crossed Copse until the passage through Stowe reflected something deeper. The fusion of a pilot who felt one again with his car. That one, 26,892, not only gave him the momentary first position. He returned something he had lost between the technical frustrations of Mercedes and the initial uncertainty in Ferrari: clarity. It was his best practice session so far from 2025, excluding his victory in the China sprint. Moreover, it was the first time that he really looked comfortable with the car, indicative that the relationship between pilot and machine was finally beginning to consolidate. The tension that was breathed in Silverstone was not only competitive, but also narrative. Every thousandth of a second was interpreted under the lens of redemption. Hamilton's symbology leading a free practice in his native circuit, in front of a British crowd anxious to see him shine again, marked a turning point. And although in the FP2 Lando Norris managed to overcome it for 23 thousandths, the message had already been sent. Hamilton had not returned to occupy a secondary role. Silverstone was the perfect setting to remind the world and himself that there are still chapters to write in his history of legend. At the end of Friday's day in Silverstone, the foci did not point to the times on screen or the technical settings behind boxes. The entire paddock was pending a single figure: Lewis Hamilton. It was not a simple media session, it was a moment loaded with symbolism, where the British pilot appeared, not only as the protagonist of the day, but as a broadcast of a message that would feed deep into the heart of the championship. It was not a prepared phrase. It was a visceral expression, a powerful metaphor of what had happened on the track. Hamilton, for weeks, had fought to decipher the DNA of his new car. The SF25, a car with an aerodynamic and equilibrium approach completely different from the W15 of Mercedes, had forced him to leave acquired habits for more than a decade. Different braking, different weight transfers, less predictable traction. Adapting was not only a technical challenge but also psychological. Each misunderstood curve, every return without trust had eroded its naturalness as a pilot. To Silverstone, the statements continued with an even more revealing tone. Hamilton not only talked about the car or its performance, he talked about himself, his internal reconstruction process. He said he was wrong to think that he could cut learning times. He believed that his experience would suffice to tame the Ferrari from day one, but it was not so. And that public acceptance of vulnerability was not a weakness. It was a sample of maturity that contrasted with the arrogance that was once blamed in his years of hegemony. This is not the end of the work, nor the principle of success. But it is the point where I stop fighting with the car and I start working with him. These types of statements are not common in the ultra-competitive and hermetic ecosystem of Formula One. What Hamilton did was open a window to his mental process, showing not only that he had made technical advances, but emotionally had taken a fundamental step. Trust again. Trust the project, in its engineers, in itself. These words not only had an internal impact on Ferrari, they also altered the psychological balance of the championship. In McLaren, who had dominated the narrative with Norris and Piastri in the first quotes, warnings were lit. In Red Bull, where Verstappen still dealt with an unstable car, British's statements were interpreted as a rising threat. Even within Mercedes, where George Russell sought to consolidate himself as heir to Hamilton's legacy, the figure of the ex-piloto resonated more strongly than ever, because it was not just a good time in the free. It was the declaration of a pilot who, after weeks of technical darkness, began to recover the light. And I said it in Silverstone, the place that had seen him champion so many times. He did not shout that he was going to win. He did not promise a pole. But he left something much more powerful, the latent sensation that if the authentic Hamilton had returned, the entire championship had to prepare for a much more complex and emotional struggle than expected. What happened during that practice day in Silverstone cannot be measured solely by the stopwatch. The numbers, although revealing, fail to capture the complete dimension of what this session for Lewis Hamilton and for the technical narrative of the 2025 season. Because although leading the FP1 may seem anecdotal in a calendar with more than 20 races, the way in which that result was built and what unleashed within the Ferrari ecosystem was all except trivial. Technically, Hamilton's performance was a masterclass for progressive adaptation. During the first quotes of the year, especially in Australia, its performance was irregular not for lack of talent, but for the incompatibility between its historical conduction style and the demands of the SF25. This car, characterized by a more advanced aerodynamic load distribution and a more aggressive curve entry, required a radical transition by a pilot who came from years working with a completely opposite concept. The transition was not only mechanical, it was cultural. The Ferrari did not tolerate its old path habits, or its way of modulating the speed with the brake. He demanded something different. In Silverstone, for the first time, Lewis executed that transformation in an organic way. The key was in the way he addressed the rapid curves of the second sector, such as Maggots, Beckett's and Chapel, where traditionally the aerodynamic balance of the car is put to the brutal proof. There, Hamilton was not only fast but meticulously precise. He drew those sequences with a millimeter cleaning, without unnecessary corrections in the steering wheel, leaving the SF25 flow to its maximum load expression. That could only be achieved if there was confidence. And trust is an element as technical as emotional in Formula One. But Hamilton's performance was not limited to a quick lap with soft tires. In long batches, when the car loads more fuel and thermal and tire management becomes critical, it maintained a stable rhythm with a controlled degradation. The career simulations indicated that Ferrari had made progress not only in the general balance, but in the efficiency of the rear train, which during the first races had been a weak point against McLaren and Mercedes. This evolution allowed Hamilton to keep the pace without excessively punishing its compounds, something vital in a circuit like Silverstone that mixes high and medium speed curves with demanding traction areas. In a championship where every detail counts, where performance is built more on margins than in the headlines, a day like Hamilton in Silverstone can alter balance. But because he showed that his adaptation curve is over, that his connection with Ferrari is no longer a development project, but a reality. And when a pilot of his caliber reaches that point of synchrony with his car, the threat is immediate and real. The season, until then dominated by McLaren and questioned by the errors of Red Bull, had just added a new contender with unquestionable credentials. And that contender, Lewis Hamilton, had just notified in the most forceful way possible, leading with authority and speaking with the calm of who knows that the best is yet to come. On Friday of practices in Silverstone closed with a sensation that transcended the data and classifications. It was not another day in the Formula One. Calendar was the day that Lewis Hamilton, in his new stage with Ferrari, ceased to be a transition project to become a tangible threat again. It was not a pole or a victory. But those who understand this sport know that there are moments that, without granting points, mark deep breaks in the narrative of a season. And this was one of them. What happened in Silverstone not only revitalizes the figure of Hamilton, but reconfigures the perception of the balance of forces on the grille. Until this point of the championship, McLaren had imposed a strategic domain with Lando Norris at the head of the championship, while Red Bull crossed internal turbulence and structural problems in its RB21. Ferrari until then seemed not to find a clear identity. But now, with Hamilton showing signs that its adaptation process has reached maturity, the board has become more complex, more unpredictable, more exciting. This is where I ask you, can Hamilton, in his first year with Ferrari, become a key piece in the fight for the championship? Or is it simply a flash that will soon be eclipsed by the constancy of McLaren? Leave me your opinion in the comments.